In a world full of anime girls, shallow gameplay, and horrible AI, VagrantZero, that's me, and my two mediocre waifus try to do the impossible. Create a review that will help you in your search for big anime titties. Vagrant's Declassified Degenerate Survival Guide. Best girl may vary. This is the type of game where I always wonder why it's made. That is until I realize that I unironically consume this type of shit. So, tip number 1 is going to be to embrace your degeneracy. This is a fan service game, and if you expect it to be subtle, you're not going to enjoy anything about it. Now with that being said, let's see if this is a good fan service game, or one that's going to sit in my Steam library having seen as much use as Stephen Hawking's running shoes. Girs Phantasia is a third-person shooter that borrows heavily from the Dynasty Warrior formula of having hordes of brainless enemies, which rival the intelligence of DMV employees, run straight at you. Add indestructible clothing, and you have what's easily comparable to Senran Kagura but with guns. The 8 main characters are high school students that were transported to a fantasy world but with military equipment and are trying to get back home. It's super generic and not really worth spending too much time on because, let's face it, no one is playing this game for the story. The shooting feels pretty good but can be a little weird in some ways. For example, there's no short reload when you still have a bullet left in the chamber, bullets disappear after a certain distance, which is a garbage way to make long-range weapons viable, and most jarringly, the mouse controls are horrendous. This has got to be the first PC shooter I've ever played where using a controller is the far better option, so much so that I would say it's necessary. Using a controller isn't too bad though, because there's little precise aiming needed. There's even a lock-on mechanic activated by rolling, though it makes you sit still while shooting. Having a large cast of characters is one thing that keeps the game feeling fresh and encourages replayability. Every character has a unique weapon, which is usually like the normal variant but with something like elemental damage or higher DPS or something like that. They also all have a special ability they can use now and then, as well as a passive ability. You do also unlock more characters as you progress through the story, and with so much variety there will definitely be someone whose personality and playstyle both match up with what you want. You could kind of say that there are different races.
Look at my African American over here.
But not like that. There's some shit like catgirls, elves, and then the enemies you fight are orcs, but that's about it. I think that this game's strongest aspect is its build customization. On top of everyone's unique abilities and weapons, leveling up allows you to put a point into the skill tree. At first sight, this tree seems like an adequate way to upgrade your characters, but when you look into it, it's really bare bones and unbalanced. Let me break it down for y'all. 4 of the weapon types require you to dump a huge amount of points into their skill tree for them to become useful. These 4 weapon trees are completely useless unless you're using the exact weapon type required to benefit from it, making about half the tree incredibly niche. Outside of that, you have movement upgrades, health upgrades, clothing health upgrades, and resistance upgrades. These have varying levels of viability. Who would take 2% resistance against this niche as fuck damage type for the same cost as a 10% health increase, which makes you tankier regardless of the damage type? Next are clothing health upgrades, which are a solid option. To explain, the clothing has its own health bar which doesn't regenerate, and once an area is destroyed, further damage to that same area will subtract from the character's health instead.
I will eat your ass!
Health and movement speed upgrades are pretty self-explanatory. Just don't give movement speed to your buddy because they rarely move and shoot at the same time. So to summarize this entire skill tree, these 3 for you, these 2 for your buddy. As characters level up, they can also equip more and more materials, which are found on missions and give bonuses to just about anything you can think of. My favorite build is to play with a melee buddy and then max out my throwing range for grenades. Characters can bring 3 weapons on a mission with them, though your AI-controlled buddy will never switch between them and will only use their unique weapon. There are quite a few options, with each weapon class trying to fill a specific niche. I say trying because some options make other ones totally obsolete. I won't really say what weapons are the best in case you want to try them all out for yourself or just use what you think looks cool, but it's not hard to figure out just by looking at the stats. There are also a few outfits to choose from, but the game goes pretty light on options available to you. You can equip the ones of unlocked characters onto other people and get the choice of like 3 different color schemes. Then you can choose to wear glasses or not, a few different hats, and maybe 10 or so bra and panty sets. It's nothing compared to similar games, but it is what it is, and at least we have some sort of visual customization. Enemies can drop variants of these clothes that grant various stat bonuses, which allows for further build customization as well. I would say that the level design is the most obvious drawback of this game, and it's a big one. Levels are incredibly bland. They're mostly flat, open-world terrain with an occasional climb needed to get to a treasure chest. There's no cover that you or enemies can stand behind, and the assets are recycled to no end. There are bosses, but they're an absolute joke, even on higher difficulties. A point-blank shotgun hit is usually enough to drop them. The common enemy design is beyond basic. If we don't include reskins and playable characters, there are only about 4 to 6 enemies depending on if you count the orc class types as reskins or not. I touched on the AI briefly in the intro, but it's seriously bad. Like, makes the DayZ AI look like what Elon Musk is afraid of bad. No one takes high points or interesting angles from which to shoot at you. Every enemy behaves exactly the same with the exception of these ghost guys and crossbow guys. However, they're complete non-factors because you legitimately cannot be hit by projectiles while moving. This makes for terrible difficulty selection since all they can really do to make the game harder is to give the enemies more HP and more damage. The lackluster AI isn't exclusive to just the enemy either. Your own buddy will run into danger, die, and then repeatedly ask to be revived every 5 or 6 seconds. Holy shit, how was it not a day 1 patch to have the characters ask for help less often? It's fine hearing it now, but after hours of playtime, the word irritating does not encapsulate the feeling. Every level and fight are only different because of what you do to make it different via your build and weapon choice. It's really unfortunate because it seems like level design and even simplistic AI would be one of the easiest things to implement comparatively to modeling, animating, and more complicated programming. I'm not sure if this counts as level design, but either way, the sound design is not pretty in this game. Sound effects are incredibly basic, and the soundtrack consists of like 3 level themes, one of which is a 50-second loop.
Can't you make her sound better? Yep.
I know I said that no one plays these games for the story, but these cutscenes are so bad. Why would you bother to make 3D models that actually look good if you're going to use them in these weird 2D visual novel cutscenes? There are already animations for all the emoting and everything that one would need to make 3D cutscenes with, but they just chose not to. Okay, so that's about it. I've summed up most of the game except for one particular interrogation section. But I'm just not sure how to approach it.
Face it, VagrantZero, you're a cringe lord. You'll never show the normies your videos.
I can't give up yet. There's gotta be some way to make this section not be complete cringe. I do have both Drake and Josh in my hand. No, he'll be expecting that. I've got it. I summon Pet Cat in attack mode, and I combine him with the magic of euphemistic analogy. Together, they're more than enough to dispel even high-tier cringe. At certain moments in the story, a character will need to be interrogated for some reason or another in what is called intensive drilling. Intensive drilling is somewhat like petting a cat. There are a lot of different methods for how you could go about doing it. Different hand strokes, body parts, even use of a tool like a brush could still be considered petting. You use these different techniques to make the cat happy. However, you must keep in mind that just because a cat likes having its ears ruffled doesn't mean that it likes having its belly fur ruffled. And of course, there are a lot of different cats out there. Your cat's preference over where to be pet isn't the same as your friend's cat. And as I'm sure you already know, cats can enjoy being pet in all sorts of different positions. Sometimes they're belly up on the floor, sometimes they're just sitting in your lap or lying on their bed. Finally, if you've ever been around someone with multiple cats, you know that you can definitely pet 2 cats at the same time. Where intensive drilling differs from real life, however, is that in the game you actually want to appropriately balance petting the cat the way it loves it and petting the cat the way it hates it. And that about sums it up. You'll notice that the commonality between most of my problems with this game stem from the same thing, a lack of polish. I don't know what kind of development process this game went through, but to me it seems like if it had another month or 2 in development, we would have gotten a much different game. As it is in its current state, the game feels like it either wasn't thoroughly playtested, or that the devs didn't have time to implement the obvious criticism they would have received from playtesting. It's like all of the pieces for a great game were there, but they just weren't put together properly. Maybe once the modding community is finished creating 101 different ways to uncensor the game, they'll move on to fixing faults in the gameplay. But until then, I'm VagrantZero, and thank you for watching my video.